So hello. As Matthew said, I'm talking about continuous delivery, continuous integration in big organizations today. In particular, this is going to be a case study. Before we start, a little bit about me. I'm Sara. I'm a product manager. I learned product in Silicon Valley, working for a SaaS company on a big business-to-business software rewrite. I'm ex-TFL, where I worked on the wildly successful, I think I can say that now because it's been sold to 2 cities, contactless ticketing system. So we just sold it through our vendor partner to Boston and before that to New York. So this software will be powering their smart ticketing solutions. Nowadays I run a product management consultancy called Ordinary Objects. This talk, it's a case study about a CI transformation I was part of at TFL. The reason it's a case study is because while I'm a seasoned product manager, I'm fairly new to continuous integration, especially the theory and the abstract aspects of it. So if I were to dive into that stuff, I think you guys' interest would quickly dive sort of asymptote to 0. So I'm gonna tell you what I know in the form of a story, an anecdote. It represents my experiences and takeaways during and after the dust settled. And I'm actually hoping to learn a lot about CI and CD today as well, from you guys and from Elizabeth. So really quickly, a survey. How many of the people in the audience work for big organizations, government, multinationals, household names? Hands up. Yeah. Of you, how many do continuous integration or delivery in some form? Okay. Okay, awesome. And the rest of you, how many of you have plans to? 1 or 2. Okay, cool, interesting. So hopefully this will be interesting to you guys. Maybe the smaller companies are a little faster, leaner on the ground. We'll get a sense of what it's like on the other side. A little bit of background on the project I'm talking about tonight. So the TFL contactless ticketing pilot began in 2012. Does everyone here know about contactless ticketing? If we have any out-of-towners. This was TFL's project for allowing your contactless bank card to behave, for all intents and purposes, like a pay-as-you-go Oyster. And this was not just tap for transaction, right? There's a lot of back-office stuff happening. I joined 1 year later on the exact date of the soft launch. TFL had ramped up a well-oiled in-house technology team. Between 50 and 100, they were running scaled Agile, Scrum of Scrums. I'm not going to go too deep into sort of Agile, Kanban, this kind of stuff, but I'll try to explain terms when I say them for people who are not super cozy with product and Agile. But if I say something that doesn't make sense, just shoot a hand up. The point is that TFL was running Agile quite well in this rather small technology team within obviously an organization of tens of thousands of people. So more background on the project. We had a Microsoft software stack, .NET, C#, SQL. We had component Scrum teams, not feature teams. It means that each Scrum team worked on one piece that hooked into every other, and they weren't sort of business feature-driven teams. Deployments were done through a technology partner in conjunction with our DevOps. This partner also operated as our systems integrator. That's big organizations speak for they own the final stages of testing and we're really responsible for production. And I'm sure at this point, a lot of you are already identifying obstacles to doing continuous delivery, right? Yeah, Harry's nodding yes. So we had merges after every 4-week sprint when I started. Feature releases every 4 to 6 months. Maintenance releases every 6 to 10 weeks. Pick up your jaws, startup people. Like this is pretty normal for big organizations. Okay, so there was some pain. Our sprint cycles were 4 weeks long. We deliver features out of our Scrum teams. I was embedded in a Scrum team as a product manager, product owner. We deliver features out of our Scrum teams at a fairly steady velocity. And by the way, these are pain points I've heard echoed by others running Agile or Lean or methodologies in big organizations. It's not unique to TFL. You may get flashbacks. Downstream of us sat TfL's integration test, UAT, and performance test teams. DevOps would integrate our components, deploy the system to our more production-like test environments internally. And if and when the integration test team had their test passing on a build, DevOps would then package this up, send it to our systems integrator for further black box testing and release sign-off. Every step meant more risks to the release, risks of bugs, of build issues, of human error, and therefore delays. Meanwhile, our dev teams are happily sprinting away, oblivious to all of this, until a late bug comes along, and suddenly we're in branch and merge hell, right? This is where I fess up. So we were definitely, the product team was definitely part of the problem. We were cutting off these big slabs of functionality from our backlog as development stories. We had this 4-week sprint, lots of room to breathe and develop. These stories would sometimes fill the whole 4-week sprint, and every now and then would spill over. We're pretty good about spillover, but they did spill over. They had complex acceptance criteria and fuzzy scope. So for those of you who don't know, acceptance criteria are scope notes. They tell you how to know when a story is finished, and they kind of help you draw lines around it so you know that you don't build too much or too little. They're also used by testers to come up with key test cases. Complex acceptance and fuzzy scope is pretty normal in TfL's domain. Our domain was really hard. I have to make that pretty clear. From figuring out how to swallow accidental taps of a contactless card at a river pier while you're queuing, to ascertaining when someone's ungated tap should be used to start or end a journey based on time constraints. This was a pretty complex domain. There was a lot of very minute business logic. And the thing about flabby stories is that they mean functional bugs are hiding out in the nooks and crannies. They are detected late, weeks or months after the stories pass Scrum teams' functional tests, and then they end up, the bugs knock at our door all of a sudden. So our releases never compromised on quality. Actually, I don't think there has ever been documented end user downtime on this system since its full launch in 2014. So it's a really, really solid system quality-wise. However, we ended up releasing smaller and smaller subsets of our committed release plans at longer and longer intervals. And this got worse and worse. We couldn't release bug fixes without compromising our feature release dates. But we were still deving at top speed, right? So we had a growing pile of unreleased, partly tested features representing more than 6 months of dev effort. So apart from a trickle, our release pipeline was blocked. The gunk inside was a broken delivery process. Does anyone recognize any of these things? Okay, cool. And I'm not, okay. All right, okay. Okay, so this was red alert, right? What did we do? We stopped. Completely. We completely stopped. Okay, let's move into sort of the CI, the new horizon. This is where it starts to get interesting. It was nearly Christmas 2014. Dev work had wound down for the holidays. We locked ourselves, we being whoever could get lassoed into the meeting rooms, as is often the case in big organizations. Product team, technical delivery managers, agile delivery lead, dev and tech leads, meeting room after meeting room. It was endless. We spent a lot of time process mapping. Value chains were written out on Post-its and taped to the walls. So first you touch the code and you build it, you test it to this point, functional test it, okay, you pass the functional test, you pass it on to this person, blah, 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 and all of this it snaked across walls and walls. At the end, everyone from every team kind of identified the same thing. And I want to sort of pause here for a moment and say, did the actual discovery exercise need to be so long and thorough? And I'm not sure. I've never been sure about this. I as a person, always want to move towards leaner process and lower overhead. But I'm not sure we could have done the soul searching without spending a lot of time in meeting rooms. And I'd be interested to hear if there's a faster way to get there. But yeah, what did we find out? That risks were compounded in the later stages: integration build, integration testing, performance testing, disaster recovery, because not enough integration was happening inside the Scrum teams. It seems pretty obvious now, right? So what did this mean? In January 2015, we downed tools. This really happened. It was really scary. We stopped feature development. Tech leadership and the product team went from desk to desk explaining the pause to stakeholders. Because it was, I mean, what do you say, you know? But we did. We tried our best to explain that we had a serious problem. And we stood up a whole new emergency backlog of continuous integration tooling changes. Frantically prioritized it. Again, meeting room after meeting room, endless lists, and so we had some constraints. We couldn't totally reset our release management process. We couldn't release to production every 5 minutes or hourly when production releases had to be, from a compliance perspective, signed off jointly with our systems integrator. There were sort of pressures on us that you won't see in a smaller organization. So we came to the conclusion that our best bet was to do one thing, to achieve one main goal: to allow the lean Scrum teams who'd been deving at their own pace to meet integrated build and test milestones earlier in the cycle. These were our steps towards continuous integration. i.e., we had to make the Scrum teams counterintuitively less speedy to de-risk and speed up the overall process. I want to say something now that may or may not resonate from a CI perspective. I was reading up, so I said at the beginning, I'm not a continuous integration theory expert, and I was reading up on some of the theory. I read quite a few papers that said, okay, you want to relax control around bugs to allow software development to run faster, sort of lean on your user a little bit. But I actually don't think that was an option for us. The extra care around production releases in this instance, I do believe that was right. The many layers of testing that I mentioned, I think we needed them. This is critical infrastructure. The user couldn't be our guinea pig. So we didn't really have that flexibility to sort of really release quickly and release often and let users find our bugs. So to an extent, that constraint was right. Okay, so what else did we do? In January and February 2015, we built a whole bunch of tools. We built an early warning check system that anticipated bad build. Very simple, you know, is the database alive? Are all the API connections, you know, alive, etc. We built a small automated integration test suite for each Scrum team to run on a dev accessible VM before a merge. And this took a lot of socialization. That was really hard, really hard. We centralized config files for the whole integrated system. We stood up some new installer kit and more. Actually, credit to the integration team, test team at this point. They actually automated a suite of about 3,000 integration tests in a frantic rush. It was really impressive. What about process, in particular from a product perspective? We went 4-week sprints down to 2-week sprints. We decided we were spending too long sprinting, and that was compounding risk. Things were bulkier, they were moving slower. We code merged as often as possible. An overall cut was taken weekly from each of the Scrum teams, and integration and performance tests were done in stages. We knew that we wouldn't get a full picture until sort of the final sprint of each release. But we at least got early sight of performance bugs from sort of week 2 or week 1 or week 2 of each release instead of at the end of sort of 4 months. Does anyone not know what a definition of ready is? Yeah, so in Agile product management, it's a sort of committed set of points that a development team agrees on together that defines when a story is ready to be selected for development. So part of our definition of ready was after this to require a story maximum size to be limited, and the limit will be different because the numbers and the way that story sizes are tracked are different in every Scrum team. But for every team, it had to be quite a small item to be a story. Our definition of done, this is the flip side. That's when you know you're done, when you know you're ready to say your work is finished on a story. The definition of done required automated integration tests to pass and early warning checks to pass. And this responsibility now came into the Scrum teams, right? Whereas before it used to sit with the integration folks. So you can imagine, well, I'll tell you, you won't have to imagine, I'll tell you what that meant. And we instantiated a DevOps Scrum every other day with tech leads and product managers attending to make sure that there was better collaboration. Release changes. So instead of releasing features every 4 to 6 months, we began to release every 6 weeks. These releases contain a mix of both features and bug fixes. But we didn't sort of take to this right away, right? It took some time to adjust. And part of the reason is the new tooling and having to sort of, just like any software you build, the tooling was software, there were bugs in it, there was sort of, we had to, we needed manuals, we needed handover, but also because of that, we had 6 months or more of unreleased development effort. So, we spent a third of 2015 focus testing and releasing the huge pileup while doing small controlled new feature development. This period became known as the flush. This was a really hard time for a product person and everyone, I think, but you can imagine, forcing yourself to select minute feature changes. Your business people are asking for the big exciting things, and you're saying, I can change the drop-down menu. And meanwhile, to be fair, the stuff coming out in the flush was very, very heavyweight feature work, but it was old. It was done and dusted from the business wants it perspective. So this is I'm really excited about this slide, because this is a slide I've wanted to talk about the whole evening, because I have 2 engineering friends and I showed them this slide and they got really angry at me. They said the gears are going the wrong way and they're deadlocked, and they would not leave me alone. So I want to give you guys a disclaimer that PowerPoint does not let you choose on a Mac, does not let you choose the direction that something spins. So please forgive me and absolve me of this grave mistake. So before we had our set of continuous integration changes, we were sort of like this, right? We're spinning so fast in our little agile bubble, but around us everything else was choking. And afterwards, we're kind of spinning slower as a Scrum team. But now, okay, actually things are moving through the pipeline. Yeah, and the reason the Scrum team got slower was because it took on the responsibility that had been sitting with the DevOps build and integration teams. So now some of the responsibility, now working in harmony with the downstream processes. So overall, I think a massive positive. Some observations. First of all, we got a lot better at releasing code into production. Our releases got a lot less harrowing too. There were times prior to the changes where we'd be awake at 4 a.m., several of us on Skype or whatever, some kind of integration bug between 2 components that hadn't been caught in any of our layers of integration testing. There'd just been too many things going on, too many factors. After the CI changes, we were releasing pretty cleanly. In terms of the code release, would be done in about an hour. The rest of the stuff took a little bit longer, backups and things like this. But I don't remember being woken up once after the changes. So we slowed down to speed up. My team eventually got faster at using the new tooling. Never as fast as they've been before. So we never got back to the early days of Speedy Gonzalez, like just sitting there sort of deving through things at sort of our wonderful agile velocity while everyone around us kind of went like this. But we did get faster. We got faster at running our integration. We called it our autegration suite. So our mini integration test suite that each Scrum team ran. We got faster at updating centralized config. We got faster at all of this. But we ultimately sped up at releasing working code to customers. And sometimes I think even product people, I think definitely everyone in a Scrum team, and product people too, who should be more business aligned, they forget that that's the point, right? The point is to get code to people fast. It doesn't matter what your velocity is, and it doesn't matter how great you are at passing a story downstream. And this was down to a steady, controlled flow of dev work with less unknowns. That's what I think. And to be fair, we did claw back time lost due to late integration bugs and the resulting rebranching and remerging pain that those caused. So that did partly counteract the slowdown. There was far fewer cases of, oh my gosh, we got a P1 coming down the line from code you built 5 months ago. So that was a definite good. And the time we lost now was down to predictable overheads. It wasn't as bad as late arriving unknowns. I think there's a world of difference between those two things. And you guys will have, I think a lot of you will be really, really, maybe part of teams that are doing really good implementations of continuous delivery, continuous integration. We didn't get all the way to real continuous delivery, not even real continuous integration. But I wonder if this was possible for us, and I'll say more about this in a second. So for the product people or product adjacent people in the room, a couple of lessons. Remember those big flabby stories? When you transition to CI, you have to get really good at vertical, thin, minimum marketable feature slicing. So the thing is that your cadence to production is faster now, and all these new milestones and continuous integration pressures require you to turn these like porous, leaky, coal, this is a terrible metaphor, I'm so sorry, like coal-shaped stories into diamond stories. So smaller, focused, defined. And relatedly, you have to get really good at demoing and explaining thin, iterative feature development to business people. So it's, I think you get really creative, right? You gotta sell the vision. The feature doesn't do much now, but it's working really well, and in 2 sprints time, it will be doing this. You need to build in even more slack when selecting stories to work on. Even though you're delivering less at first, CI processes for us were super time-consuming and tricky to bed in. The team, I think our team, many teams are used to pure feature development when, the development test teams, the Scrum teams. And it took us a while to get the hang of it. And as a product manager, product owner, don't be the bottleneck. People will look to you for those focused little stories more often because they're little, they dev them faster, they can integrate them faster. So you got to make sure that you've not only have you got a backlog that's full, but also you've done the work of slicing. So everything starts as coal. You got to make the diamonds before people need the diamonds, right? So as far as product people in big organizations, some lessons. So this was maybe my big aha moment or takeaway when I was writing this talk. If you work in a big organization of a certain type, I don't think that you can use the user to find bugs. I don't think that you can always take the approach of releasing slightly lower quality code to help stabilize and improve your velocity. And this, I think this will make you slower, and I think that's okay. Releasing code with bugs to fix them faster may work well for like photo sharing app, an online reservations system maybe. Outages or bugs in our software were infrastructurally and reputationally critical. They just weren't an option. So we couldn't really flex in that direction. And release management team, systems integrator, dev teams, I wasn't sure that every silo that exists in a big organization can be torn down, that it always should be torn down. Again, I am kind of a lean working evangelist, but there are checkpoints and compliance procedures in big organizations that I'm not sure it's always advisable to get rid of. Some teams may be financially obligated to own certain SLAs. Some teams may represent compliance. They may have to show their working to auditors every year. So as much as we all want to be one team that's all doing the same work to deploy to prod every time there's something ready for prod, I think that these silos in big organizations may not be the right place to start doing that good work. And that brings me to be patient. So you may come to talks like this and listen to idealized versions of continuous delivery. But the reality is, if you work in a big organization, you may not be able to rebuild a perfect software development pipeline. At TfL, we'd begun from a relative greenfield. We were the first in-house tech team at TfL. We ran Agile from the start. We benefited from sort of the state-of-the-art in terms of software delivery methodologies and also technology tools. But as you heard, our version of state-of-the-art turned out to be out of step with the rest of the players in our ecosystem and the pressures around us, and we had to accommodate. We ended up having to be the ones to flex. So there were a lot of moments of frayed nerves for me during this, and I think that patience is a lesson that I also took. So one final observation. So, and I think that when we talk about Agile, sometimes we talk about all or nothing. When we talk about product methodology, we sometimes talk about all or nothing. But I think that incremental moves in the direction of continuous delivery, in my experience, they are valuable. And they do bring benefits, and it's not all or nothing. And you can see that we didn't get all the way with continuous delivery. But I'm going to leave you with another awesome metaphor. Think of it as stretching yourself in the right direction. Think of it like yoga. You might need the foam block to do a stretch, but you're still stretching further than you were before. So I think that's my last point to mull on. And thank you very much. Thanks for listening to me. Does anyone, do we do questions? Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So this is a bit of a weird one. When it comes to deployment with your systems, do you deploy like per station, or does it get deployed like in one go? I'm generally quite interested by that.
Okay. Station, you mean per team, per component team?
I mean like per Oxford service.
Physical station.
Oh, sorry, okay. So the question was, when it comes to deploying our code, do we deploy per station or all in one go?
Yeah.
And clarify station for me?
The station is in Oxford Circuit.
Oh. Okay, so we were back office software. We did not deploy to physical locations. We deployed to server somewhere. But the pieces that are like reader software, I actually don't know because it's not owned by TfL.
Okay, no,
yeah, I know that there are deployments, some really fun and tricky use cases where it comes to things like the bus readers where
delayed, right?
Yeah, they have to go into the depot, and every time one goes into the depot, they get the deployment. So sometimes that stuff can, if I'm not mistaken, all of this is grain of salt because this is not TfL's technology. But yeah.
Thank you.
That's all right. Yes.
Hi, thanks, that was a really good talk, learned a lot. When you were talking about having to tell the business people that are going to get smaller features, but they'll get them in 4 weeks instead of 3 months.
Yes.
Did you consider instead becoming like a translation layer? So you would still tell the business people you're going to get big features in 3 months, but then the developers were telling you you're going to get little features in 4 weeks, and you have to bridge the gap.
I think that that's a little contrary to product best practice, because part of the reason you check in so often is to make sure you're on track with the requirements. If you have a partial iteration, let's say a partial feature after 1 month, and you have the opportunity to show it to someone, that's an opportunity where they may tell you you're on the wrong track. That if you wait 4 months, then suddenly you've built the whole big wrong thing that you could have stopped yourself earlier. But that was not what we had to evangelize. We had to evangelize the slowdown of new feature development because of the fact that we built up the massive pileup. So we were saying we can't sprint on your new requirements for a while. And that was the hard part. But yeah, in general, I think that we could talk about it, but in general, it's considered a good thing to stop and show as often as possible.
Yeah, otherwise you're in waterfall mode, right?
That's it. Yes?
Yeah, so I'm head of delivery at quite a small company, but you mentioned about as a product person, it's your responsibility to get things into nice small chunks.
Yes.
And change the way you approach that. We get quite a lot of pushback from the product team going, how can we possibly be the ones making that decision on the size of stories, because we're not the ones implementing it? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, it may be there's maybe a nuance there. So I think sizing a story and figuring out that you have a small enough story is a team effort between the product person and the rest of the developers and testers. But there are sort of if you just Google thin slicing, there's a list of ways that a product person can take a large requirement and decide to sort of map one thin piece of it. And just doing that, you know that you're starting with something that's closer to diamond shaped than coal sized. And then you may be wrong, right? So I might take that and think that I've got a 3-point story and then be told that it's 21 points, and then we'll have to redraw the thin slice together. But the starter for 10, the sort of the beginning of the slicing is the product person's initiative usually.
Not feature mapping type thing.
Sorry?
Like a feature mapping type thing.
Oh, I'm not sure.
You know Jeff Passon's feature mapping?
Is this the big diagram?
Story mapping. Sorry.
Story mapping,
Yes, story mapping. That's it. That's the one. Yeah.
Which we do actually use.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm more from the test side, but we do a lot of continuous delivery when we manage it. And one of our problems is the maintenance cost of our test cases. So you said that your automation team, I think your automation team, managed to churn 3,000 test cases in about 2 months or 3 or whatever. But I'm just trying to see, did you have any maintenance cost of keeping those test cases up to date, and what happens when they fail? That's really a pain.
Yes, we hadn't solved this problem when I left. Definitely, it would rear its head every now and then, and often the solution we considered had to do with abstracting away from real databases. Does this make sense to you? Yeah. But obviously with that you're talking about idealized test data, and you're not using. So we actually had not come to a good conclusion about how to keep the test cases fresh and passing using real test data without them expiring themselves after certain amounts of time, and maybe someone can tweet about it or let us know. But yeah, we hadn't solved it. Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
What was the Final Jeopardy that really let them put the brakes on and say stop? Because I guess you're sort of a monopoly, right?
Yeah.
You don't really have any competition. Was that fair?
You mean TFL as an organization?
Yeah, as an implementation people, there isn't other people trying to do.
No, that's right. Well, we were benchmarked against Oyster. Because we had to have a parity between the two solutions, which sometimes ended up being a little bit sad, because the software can do a lot more than an Oyster card can. But I think what it was we just saw that we were stuck in a worsening pattern. We as the tech team, we saw that we had more and more things queued for release, and less things going out in every release, and more delays to every. We knew that we were in a pattern where we were stockpiling, and we could not. The things that were sitting in that pile were starting to age out. The tests had aged out, so we'd have to rerun the tests. They were too old. The code was too old to be released to production, even if it had passed. So it was like it was a self-awareness thing. It wasn't somebody else and say, fix this. We just said, shit, what do? We have 9-month-old code sitting waiting for deployment, and we don't have a way to get there.
So it was would you say it was your opinion, or did you have like a body of data that you said, this is the data that we put on our system and this shows that we need to stop? I'm just wondering if you had that.
Oh, okay. We didn't have like statistics, but what we knew was we had code as old as, let's say, August 2013, queued for delivery that had been promised in January 2014, and now it was December. So something we could tell that our pipeline wasn't working. It wasn't sort of we didn't need that kind of quantitative backing. We're just so delayed on some stuff.
Probably your P1s on 9-month-old code is enough of a red
That's it. Yes. Then you have to fix a bug in it and try to
It's 9
dig
months
up the
ago
branch and
you did
yeah.
that and whatever.
Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned something about centralized configuration
Mhm.
files, and I haven't heard about that, but could you explain it a little bit?
I'll say because it's also kind of, I only understand it in the abstract. And another thing I had to learn in this process was to just have faith in the dev teams explaining some of the feature work we were doing, because they're quite technical stories. I think every component had its own config file prior. And centralized config meant everybody just updated their configs in one file in a structured format that was consistent for every team, so that you didn't have configs go missing or override each other or stay on prod servers because they weren't wiped or whatever. So that was sort of the idea. But again, I may be mangling that, and Google will probably know a little more. Yes.
You kind of mentioned that you had to slow down to avoid bugs going through, and that the kind of nature of your business, you can't afford those bugs going through. What were you doing to prevent this going through? Like, what was the extra steps that you had to take on board?
Yeah. So what I meant was so we had test-driven development was happening. So everything was unit tested very well. We had a functional test suite on every component of a couple of thousand, and those were often quite detailed and very nuanced, lots of business logic checks. Then we had the integration test suite was several thousand test cases, and that tested the end-to-end integrated code. And then we had a performance test step, and then after after the performance test step and user acceptance testing, that's when we passed the code out of TFL to our systems integrator. It's a partner. And then they did their own black box functional testing. They tested the code on mock readers, mock stations in their premises. They did like staging tests. So they did like production-like testing, their own disaster recovery and stress testing. And only then would they sign it off. So there was many, I'm comparing it to something like an online shopping site. The layers of testing, there were a lot of them.
So you mentioned that a lot of those tests you want in. I just wondered whether you could release in a different way that still allowed you to release early. For example, like ramping things up so you can push stuff into production without having to go through so many testing, but you can kind of test it almost in production. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What kinds of things?
So you launch
low risk things.
You're launching things that no one will see.
Whitelist and things like that. Yeah. We definitely played with that. But we didn't get to the point where whitelisted and low risk things were bypassing that process. That would have been an interesting step. Matthew, do we still have time, or we've got a couple more questions?
We've got time for 2 more quick questions, and then we'll take a quick break.
Yes.
So you said quality was really important, and you couldn't test on your users. Did you have any sort of like rollout to beta testers or some sort of early access group?
We did. So I mentioned the pilot. The pilot ran with a set of whitelisted cards for about, I want to say, a year. And then we also had people with test cards who would do production testing the day after a release. So they go around and use cards at stations. But it's a little bit hard. It's a little bit hard to, apart from whitelisting, it's a little bit hard to release a bug in a controlled way onto London Underground. But yeah, we did have some methods. Yeah.
Were all of the changes that you made within your organization, were they like within TfL, or do you have to get like a lot of help from your system integrator, or were they just kind of like unaware this was happening? Or
They were definitely aware, because they had to be in step with us, because they were part of the sign-off process for releases to production, and they also were responsible for prod code. But I think the impetus came from within, and I can't stress enough. It was a really refreshing public sector team to work for, in the sense that I think that everybody knew what we wanted, and we knew what best in class looked like, and we kind of wanted that. We couldn't always have it, but we did want it, and we didn't sort of think like bad patterns and bad patterns and things that were not conducive to the best transport network weren't allowed to sort of hang around in the code for a long time. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.